Hello, good evening, and welcome to My Advances. We are back with Dr. Vladimiro Silva. You can see him right here, and I'm glad that we are going to discuss this topic today. Dr. Vladimiro already told me that it's gonna be an interesting event before we even started, so I'm sure he has plenty of things to present today and share with you. So I'm sure it's gonna be definitely something that worth checking out. So as always, we will start with Vladimir's presentation, but after that, there will be time for questions. So, as always, please put those in the chat. And this is all anonymous. And Vladimiro, if you had a chance to participate in our webinars with him before, I'm sure you know that you can expect a thorough answer, and he will definitely be happy to answer those questions for you, right?
Yeah. Well, hi, Caroline. Nice to be here. Once again, thanks to the European Fertility Society for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be here. Tonight, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics in IVF. Obviously, I can reply to more technical questions at the end, but tonight I'm going to speak a little bit on the legal framework, on how things should be handled. Also, I will try to help patients through their journeys, just to guide them on what should they look for in a clinic. And so this is why I was saying that it is interesting, because it falls a little bit out of what's normally presented even by myself. Okay, so let's start. I will share my screen. Let's see if we
let's
can
go
do
ahead.
it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, 1 second. Okay. Select the whole screen. I believe it's going to be a hot topic for the next upcoming maybe 5 to 10 years. And it's actually something that it's really important. A lot of patients ask us questions that have to do with this, and we can see that it is a real concern for many patients. And probably the only patients who are not concerned about this are those who haven't thought about this. Okay, so the first thing that I would like to address is assessing the donor ID, okay? Because we're talking about egg donation, so we're involving a third party in our family. So there's no one who decides that they want to have a kid, so let's find a donor. No, people don't think like that. People try to have babies with their own cells, with their partners. Obviously, if they are a single woman or a lesbian couple, they will need a donor. But when we are talking about egg donation, it's never a first choice. Okay, so we're involving a third person here, and so this brings a lot of questions. And obviously, the curiosity is natural, but it's not just curiosity. It's also there are also a lot of other questions that have a direct implication in our family, in the life of our future children, and so this is why it is so important. So the first point that I want to address is assessing the donor ID. The first reason for us, why do we need it? Why do we need to have access to the donor ID? Well, first of all, because it is a human rights issue. For example, the European Court of Human Rights have already made some decisions recognizing the right of every person to have access to their personal origins. 2 of them were in France, another one was in Switzerland. I got this from a French website that I recommend to everyone. It's called pmaanonyme.fr. So it's an association dedicated to defend non-anonymous IVF. And there is also this important decision from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where they say, because those initial decisions from the European Court of Human Rights were in 2011, 2003, 2006, and then in 2019, the Council of Europe has published this document. This is available online in English and French, where you can read that international and European human rights, the international and European human rights law has moved towards the recognition of a right to know one's origins. And the Committee of Social Affairs Fair's Health and Sustainable Development believes that anonymity should be waived for all future gamete donations. Obviously, they say that every state should create their own laws, but they consider this to be one of the obligations of the state. Obviously, these are not binding decisions. These are recommendations for the members of the European Union and obviously for other countries. But it is a clear sign that there is a movement on the human rights side towards giving access to the identity of the donors. It's also a public health issue. Why is that? Because people conceived by anonymous egg and sperm donations, they only know half of their medical history, or even none, if it is a double donation. And so the identity of the donor can be of particular importance if, for example, if there is a suspicion of a genetic disease, if someone in the family is affected. So it is really important in terms of the detection, the prevention, the treatment and management of genetic diseases. Obviously, we can argue that, okay, but with an anonymous sperm donor or an anonymous egg donor, that's what we're talking about here, we can also reserve their DNA and then clarify. It's not exactly like that. First of all, because donors that have agreed to be non-anonymous are more keen to be contacted by future children, and so it's relatively easier to reach out to them and ask them questions about their families, about their personal life, ask them to do further testing if necessary. Sometimes the type of DNA that we preserve is not enough for the type of testing that we need to do. So the only safe the only safe way for us to have access to the genetical history of the donor's family is obviously by having direct access to the donor herself, or at least to be able to contact her relatively in a relatively easier way. And obviously, if the donor is non-anonymous, she knows that she can be contacted, and she's someone who is expecting to be contacted, and it is, from our experience, a lot easier to talk to donors that have donated in open ID conditions than in other conditions. Also, because in several countries there is no effective central control over donation limits, and then there is the risk of consanguinity. Okay, we even, for example, in Portugal, there is a clear limit in the law. The law states that an egg donor can only donate 4 times in her lifetime, and these donations are effectively controlled by the state. So we cannot start an egg donation cycle without a donation code. That donation code is directly linked to the donor's national ID or passport number if the donor is not Portuguese. And for that specific national ID number or passport number, there could be only 4 donation codes. And so if the donor donates elsewhere, she can't donate with us for the 5th time. And that's how it works. But in many countries, this type of limits do not exist. And so there, even though in the law there are things like a donor cannot donate more than 3, 6, 10 times, whatever, but since this is not effectively controlled, a donor can donate in Clinic A, then across the street at Clinic B, then on the other side of the town on Clinic C, and so on and so forth. And obviously, clinics end up losing the risk of consanguinity, and clinics end up losing track of that, and the governments don't have any way to control it, and it can be a mess. Probably within a few years, we will see that there are donors with 20 kids and so on, and this is not good, and it's obviously also a public health issue because of the risk of consanguinity. We know it's not very likely, but one case would already be too much. It's also an ethical issue, okay? Because when we are deciding whether the donor is anonymous or not anonymous, we are giving our opinion, or maybe the opinion of the future parents. So we can't make decisions on behalf of the persons that will be more affected by those decisions. Obviously, those who are not born yet. It's not possible to ask a baby who has not been born whether he or she wants to meet their donors. So we should leave that decision for later, for them when they are old enough to understand things and to make their own decisions. So the decision of accessing the identity of the donor should in fact belong to the children conceived through the donation, not to their parents, not to the politicians, not to the state. Okay, it's an ethical question. It's about respecting someone else's life and opinions. And then, because it is inevitable, okay? Nowadays, we have already DNA banks all over. There are banks with more than 30 million persons in their database. And so it is extremely easy it is extremely easy to find out the identity of a donor. For example, in this article that was published 8 years ago, these researchers were already saying that we were facing the end of donor anonymity because genetic testing was driving anonymous gamete donation out of business. And why is that happening? Obviously, because when we send our DNA to one of those banks, can just Google Ancestry DNA or whatever, and then we pay 50 euros and we receive a kit in our home. We do an oral swab and we send the sample back to the lab, and in 2 or 3 weeks they will get back to us saying you are 20% European, 10% African, whatever, and we have here 10 half brothers, 20 half sisters, and 87 cousins. Do you want to get in touch with them? And if those persons allowed to be contacted, we just pay like 20 euros or something like that, and we have access to all of those persons. And so sometimes it's, even if the donor himself or herself has not sent her DNA to these databases, sometimes it's extremely easy with just 1 or 2 of her cousins, and we can triangulate the information and find out about her identity. So there are hundreds, maybe thousands of cases of donors whose identity has been found through these DNA banks, and we are only in 2024. In 20 years from now, science will certainly be a lot more advanced. Maybe we can even Google it. It will certainly be a lot easier. So in reality, there is no such thing as an anonymous donor. What we have is donors who agreed to be contacted and have received proper counseling about the possibility of being contacted by their offspring, their biological offspring, and donors who have never agreed to do that, who have never been counseled about that, who don't expect to be found, and probably don't agree with the possibility of being found. And so when that happens, that could be rejection, there could be negative feeling towards a child. So you don't want to have a kid, and that kid is spending all of his life or her life idealizing the donor, and then you do a DNA test, you find the donor, and the donor rejects her because the donor wasn't even aware that she could be found. So it's not correct. It's not okay to do it like that. So if it is inevitable, let's do it in the right way, with everybody on board, with the proper counseling, with real limits. It's not a jungle, okay? We need to do things in a proper, organized, well-counseled way. And so this is one of the arguments in favor of transparency. For example, in France, this association that I was talking about, Emma Anonyme, they have already been able to find out the identity of 117 donors and 513 half brothers and half sisters. Okay, and thanks to the DNA banks, thanks to the law, only 4 donors. Okay, so that's the difference. Obviously, the law in France has changed recently. it is not a completely fair comparison, but there is actually no difference between what can be done with these DNA testings and so on. And these people, the people from this association, are just an example. There are associations like this all over the world, and we completely have to respect and understand their position. They were born from anonymous donations. They want to have access to an important part of their identity. They want to know the story of their family, of their origins, and so on. So it's completely acceptable and understandable what they are doing. What is not okay is the way that the state was handling and is still handling these questions, creating all sorts of barriers. So once again, it's important it's important to avoid this from happening, to keep this from happening. We don't want our kids to be involved in this kind of quest for the identity of their donors without really knowing whether they're going to find it, whether the information is reliable or not. We want our kids to have a right to, and especially the right to decide whether they want to have access to the identity of the donor or not. And then one of the things, but okay, we're talking about all of this, but what does it mean to have an anonymous donor? Why is it so important? Well, it's important because at the same time, well, maybe in another way. It's important because it doesn't keep you from deciding what is best for you and your family. So we all know, and probably some of the people that are listening to us at this moment, the decision whether to tell the kid that they were conceived through a donor or not is a decision that ultimately belongs to the families. If you ask my opinion, our clinic's opinion, we are completely in favor of revealing that information. Why is that? Because normally these secrets are not sustainable. They will, in an argument, if someone else knows, there is a high risk of that information being leaked, and so the feelings of betrayal, of lack of trust could arise from that. So it's preferable for a child that they know since forever that they were born from a donation. It's part of their identity, and they are okay with that. All the studies show that. But still, it is a private decision from every family. So each parent should decide whether to disclose to their children whether they were conceived through a donor or not. State and the clinics and the doctors shouldn't interfere in a private decision from the family. If the families decide to disclose the information to their child, like we recommend, the children will have the legal right, once they get to the age of 18, to request information about the identity of their donor. So it's not someone on their behalf, it's them, because the information concerns them. This is a right of the children, not a right of the parents, and also not an obligation from the state. It is up to the child to decide, I want to have access to the identity of these persons, or I don't want that. And these children, they have the right to change their minds. So if they don't want to have access to this information today, they have every right to say, I've changed my mind at the age of 20, at 30, at 50, at 60, so this information should be kept for a very long time. In Portugal, the state keeps this information for 75 years. All the countries with open ID legislations have this sort of time to keep this information. So it is up to the children, to the persons conceived from the donations, to decide if and when they want to find out about their origins, with no time pressure and no interference from third parties. The other point of having a non-anonymous donor is about the privacy of the child, because this is a one-way system. A donor can never reach out to the children, so you don't want to be living your life calmly and someone says, "Good morning, I'm the egg donor that donated the egg for you to be born." This is not something that can happen because donors don't have absolutely any right towards these children. They don't even know that there are children born from their donation when they do it in Portugal, and they have absolutely zero rights over the children that are born. Also, the same way, children have no legal claims or rights in relation to the donor. If, for example, Cristiano Ronaldo was a sperm donor, a child from him will not have any right to access a little piece, a little wheel of his Bentleys. Okay, so it's a one-way system, and it's the way where all the power is where it should be, on the child that is born from the donation that will become an adult at the age of 18. And then it's important that when we have a non-anonymous donors, it's important to know that we have a lot more control over a lot more factors. So nothing is left to luck. Patients, the future parents, have access to extensive donor profiles that cover a long list of characteristics, so they can make an informed choice. If for some, I've been talking through the years with many intended parents. Sometimes people look for physical characteristics, sometimes they look for psychological characteristics, level of studies, education, whatever. So everyone has their own requirements, their own idea, and all positions are respectable. We obviously have the law. We can't disclose everything that patients want to say. That's normal, but within the framework of the law, we should give as much information as we can and as the donor has agreed to share. With an anonymous donors, it's also about accountability, because, for example, when you do a phenotype matching, when I offer a suggested donor to a patient, I can say, well, I'm suggesting donor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because I think she looks like you. And her phenotype matches yours and so on. But I will be accountable for that, because in 18 years, the children born from that donation can have access to the identity of the donor. And so ultimately, I can have that family back in the clinic saying, is this the person that you thought looked like us? No, it's this is also about accountability. Okay, so we're not hiding behind a face matching system or whatever softwares there are in the market right now, because we are there and we can say whether this is a good match or not, and whether we're just thinking about physical characteristics, or we're also thinking about considering other features that sometimes are even more important for patients than the physical ones. For example, also because if we are sharing the information with the children, especially in that case, the fact that children comes from a donor is something that will be no secret to anyone, starting with the child. And so it will be normal if the child has something different than the donor. It's completely normal, because he or she knows that he came from a donor. So it's okay. Maybe it's more important to be sure that the donor is someone who is nice, who is willing to share her identity, who has maybe the same level of education or the same type of interests, or someone that we can relate even with just the figure of the donor, the idea of the concept of the donor. Maybe it's more important than to be sure that she has the exact same skin tone and hair color and eye color and so on, because it's also acceptable to give more value to physical characteristics. The important thing here is that this is a dynamic system where there is a dialogue between the clinics and the patients, and patients know exactly what they're getting. Also, like I was mentioning before, donors receive proper counseling to make sure that they are well equipped to deal with eventually or being contacted by children born from their donation. This is something that we consider as absolutely mandatory. We cannot accept a donation from a person who doesn't agree with that. First of all, because it's the law in Portugal, and they need to sign a document where they say that they are okay with that. And secondly, because even if they were signing it without reading, we need to make sure that these persons are prepared and they are in full conscience of the decision that they are making, because it is an irreversible decision. In Portugal, the non-anonymity of the donors comes from a decision from the Constitutional Court. So this is something that will never change because it is the highest court in the country. And so it's really, so there's no pulling back on that authorization. Once the donor is non-anonymous, he's non-anonymous forever. And once again, accountability and clarity. Clinics ensure that every donation is ethically sourced and that each donor is treated with dignity. Once again, if the children and the families are meeting the donor in the future, we don't want the donors to be telling them, I wasn't well treated by this clinic. So it's, when there is clarity, when we know that wherever we are doing, will be exposed to the families in the past, it's self-regulated system. Okay, it's obviously possible that the clinic working with anonymous donations does everything this way, but this is a self-regulated system. Okay, and also what I was also briefly mentioning, clinics and the state have a certainty over the exact number of donations per donor. In Portugal, egg donors can donate 4 times in their lifetime, separated by at least 3 months. Sperm donors can donate up to 8 families. The number of donations per donor is effectively controlled through a donation code assigned by the National IVF Authority and linked, there's a typo there, to the donor ID. And also, there are no donor auctions in Portugal. So payments to donor are extremely transparent. They are fixed by the state every year, and they are the same for all public and private clinics. In Portugal, we pay 1,019 euros per egg donation. That was fixed last month in January, and 51 euros per sperm collections. Donors must sign a receipt. We can't pay them in cash. So it's an extremely transparent system. Okay, and so it's also important for those who are doing treatments to know that these donor candidates are truly altruistic. They are not being exploited. We're not taking advantage of poor people or people in need. This is something that is very clear. It's fixed in the law. It's transparent. We all know how much is paid, and it can't be more clear. Also, and so it is obviously 1,000 euros. It is already something, but it's 1,000 euros 4 times in their lifetime. So donors can donate between the age of 18 to the age of 34, and so in all of those 16 years where they can donate, they can only donate it 4 times and get 1,019 euros per donation. It's not a lot. You can't live out of this, so you can't make a living out of this money. This also assures that there is a truly altruistic dimension in the donation. So it's really important that that patients going there know that there was a fair and clear contract between the clinics and the donors, that there was no auction or bargaining between the donors and the clinics like we have in some less regulated countries. And then we can just make a comparison between the old anonymous system versus the modern non-anonymous one. In anonymous donations, parents, I will go by the topics. Parents controlling the narrative, it's the same. It's the same for both systems, because whether your donor is OpenID or not, you can decide. It's up to the parents to tell the children or not whether they come from a donation or not. However, there are differences. If parents disclose the donation, the child can know about their origins only with open donors. Families can contact the donor in case of life-threatening diseases or disorders. It's a characteristic of the non-anonymous donation systems, obviously with some constraints. In Portugal, this has to be done through the IVF authority. Maybe in some countries where anonymous donation exists, that possibility also exists. Usually it's not like that. It's more complicated. Especially donors are more available when they are non-anonymous. Donors are prepared and willing to be contacted should there be a wish or a need to do so. Obviously, in anonymous donation, then they can be contacted, but they are not prepared, not necessarily willing to be contacted, and so it's done in an uncontrolled way. The certainty about the number of siblings born from a single donor, it's not necessarily a characteristic of a non-anonymous donation, but it's something that doesn't exist in countries with anonymous donation. So there are countries where there is a clear limit in the law, okay? But since the central control is not efficient, it's not possible for the state to say this donor has donated 3 times, 4 times in clinic A, B, C, and D. It's something that can be worked. They can obviously use donation codes like we do have in Portugal, but it's something that is still not done. And obviously the fact that the donors are anonymous doesn't help this. And then it's about the full donor profiles. We will talk about this later in this presentation, that are only available when we're talking about non-anonymous donation. And then there is the process of egg donation. So the first thing, because this is a question that it is a recurrent question from our patients. A lot of them ask us, so how do you select your donors? Well, this is not a minor detail. We have obviously the clinical evaluation and the psychological evaluation. When we talk about clinical evaluation, I'm not going into details, but obviously there's the clinical examination. We talk about the general health of the donor. So we obviously take a look at, we do a very thorough gynecological examination with ultrasound scan and so on. We evaluate the clinical history, the family history of the donor. We screen for infectious diseases, and this is not complete. There's also HDLV, chlamydia, and so on. And we do the genetic screening, and nowadays we are screening for donors up to 2,200 diseases. And then there's a psychological evaluation. We assess the donor's mental health. Obviously, we screen for psychopathology. We cannot do a full examination because this is not a therapeutic consultation, but we do use techniques to screen for mental diseases, for mental illness. We assess the donor's openness to the donation process, obviously also in terms of compromise, collaboration, there's responsibility, because we want the donors to be really committed to the process, not missing consultations, not giving up in the middle of the process. We need to be sure that the donors understand the steps of the process and the duration. We need donors to fully understand the consequences of the donation for their future. We need to educate the donors emotionally, and obviously we need to be there to support the donors emotionally, because sometimes under the effect of the hormones, things can be can change, and so we need to be there all the time. This is a full-time job. We have a team of psychologists, and it is a really important part of their job is to follow up on donors and always make sure they feel well. When we talk about the genetic screening, we obviously do the karyotype, but we also screen for genetic recessive diseases. I'm not gonna talk a lot about this, but we're all carriers for some genetic diseases. The risk only exists if we have a child with someone who is also a carrier of that same genetic disease. If that happens, and that does happen in 2 to 5% of the cases. So in those 2 to 5% of all couples, there is a 25% chance of having an affected child with a recessive disease. Okay, the overall risk is considered to be low because it's 25% of maybe 2%, but it's still a significant number. And obviously, when you're already introducing someone else into your family, someone else's genes into your family, you want to be sure that you will not have complications. This is why we work with these genetic panels. Our egg donors are tested for more than 70 diseases, and then we can upgrade their testing to more than 500 or more than 2,200 diseases. So it is complex. When we test, the way to do it is to test both elements of the couple, but it is something that we are now doing routinely and brings an extra layer of safety to the donation process. And so let's talk a little bit about our donors. The age limit is 18 to 34. There are no limits of nationality or ethnicity, so we have donors from, obviously, the vast majority of our donors are Portuguese, but we also have donors from other countries like Brazil, like other European countries. They are they mirror the Portuguese society. So when you come to Portugal, what you will see here is what you will see in our egg bank. They have to be in good health because we check for all of that. They have to be fertile. We also run fertility tests. We educate them not only in delivering the injections, but also to understand the process, to be motivated. For example, we have an egg donor who is doing now, at this moment, she actually published it today, an Instagram live, like a real-time insight into the donation process. So people can see, because she's doing that out of pure altruism. She wants to motivate other persons to donate and show how it works. She has already donated 3 times, so she's doing her 4th and last donation, and she's very committed. She's an advocate for donation, and she wants to share because she's also relatively famous in the Portuguese Instagram field, and so this is something that we consider as very important. So for us, it is really good when we see that happening, because it means that we've done our job really well, because this person not only is motivated, but she's also well educated, she's well trained, and she wants to spread the word and share her generosity. She's proud of being a donor, and she's motivating other donors. And then we give the donors, we give the patients our extended profile. It is the donor extended profile. It is really important for patients to understand that this is something that we've been doing through the years. Now, this is on the screen. You can see a small image of our old genetic profile. Okay, normally it had 4 or 5 pages with a lot of information. We now have the new ones. I'm going to show you the new ones. Well, this is still the old extended profile with a lot of informations on general information, education, personality, what the donor thinks about the donation, the lifestyle, dreams, preferences, experiences, genealogical table. But we've moved into a more maybe interesting one. This is the new donor profiles that we're using at FertilSimple. I'm just going to walk you through the pages. We start with the physical characteristics. This is an example of a real donor. Okay, this is a real donor profile. And for example, this donor, she's Portuguese. She has dark blonde hair, blue eyes, 1.66 m, O negative. She's an accountant. This donor, we have then a section on the skin tone, because for example, it is very important that patients understand where the skin tone, what is the skin tone of the donor. So we give examples of random photos of people. We explain exactly what we consider to be associated to each type of skin tone. And then, for example, this donor is classified as type 2, so we know that the donor skin tone should be something around here. Then an opinion, what the donor has said about how she sees the non-anonymity. So she says that she understands and accepts non-anonymity. If someone born from her donation comes looking for her in the future, she'll be very happy, because this is the way she knows if she's managed to help a family. Whoever is a mother is the one who generates and creates. I don't think there would be a problem with that I would have a problem with that. I'd love it if they came to me. The donor is open to with her family. She has a family, she has her own kid, and so she shared this information, the fact that she's donating with their own kids. So then the clinical profile, the type of tests that were done. She has done the carrier genetic screening, so this means that we can match her with that list of up to 2,200 diseases. One second. Well, there is some bug here. Okay, sorry, there was a mistake here. Then we have the motivation for donation. The donor, she's already a mother, and says that she's donating because it is one of the best roles in life. She has always enjoyed helping, and so on. So we share that type of information. Then we have also information on. We have a genealogical table with informations on the donor family, their parents, their grandparents, their siblings. So every type of information that we can get, we can put it here. So you can go a little through the other members of their family. We also give an emotional intelligence score. We use a global score of emotional intelligence. Then the opinion of the psychologist. There is a reference of the test that was used. We also do a personality profile, for example. For example, this donor is an outgoing person that enjoys to participate in social events such as music festivals. She's persistent, disciplined, and goal-oriented. She's trustworthy and altruistic. So these are on the below. You can see the references on the type of test that was done. We also share some trivial information about the donor, because it's also important for people, for the patients, and obviously the future child before they reach the age of 18, to have to build the vision of the person that was behind their donation. A sentence from a donation. Some information. For example, this donor likes to cook and to read. Her best holidays were in the very beautiful islands of Azores. She does running, type of diet, favorite food, favorite animal, all that kind of thing. Then a message to the donor, from the donor, and the last page is about the patient signing up and accepting the donor. Okay, this is a huge piece. All of the donors have this type of information, and this is done by our team of psychologists. So this is a huge responsibility from our side. And so when we are offering a donor to a patient, we are offering not only a list of physical characteristics, but also a lot of information. So it's a different type of donation. It's about being transparent and understanding how things work. So, and then when we're talking about transparency, we're also talking about understanding the process. This is also not a minor detail. Very briefly, how does it work? Obviously, now I'm talking more about our clinic than the system. We have the medical consultation, then we have a donor selection questionnaire where we will ask you what are your physical characteristics, what aspects do you consider important while selecting a donor. Then our donor coordinator will review your responses, your anxieties, your requests, whatever, and she will propose you a donor that best fits your needs. Then you will receive the profile. If you agree with the donor, you approve the donor, and we follow up with treatment. If you don't agree with our offer, we will repeat the selection process until you are satisfied with your choice. Okay, so the process will only go on if you agree with the donor, if you are in peace with our donor proposition, and so if you're not happy with it, we will not move on with the donor. Then we organize the treatment in two different ways. We can do it in a synchronized way. This is what we call the standard treatment. If you come from abroad, you need to stay in Portugal for 8 days, 7 nights. So you can start in your country of origin and then do the last week of treatment here in Portugal. The advantage of doing this is that you only do one trip to Portugal, you stay here for a week, and this is enough to 90% of the cases. Obviously, we need to see the details, but what are the disadvantages of this? Obviously, the uncertainty associated with synchronizing your menstrual cycle with the menstrual cycle from the donor, uncertainty about the embryo development, because obviously we are creating the embryos after your arrival. And so we have to see how the embryos develop and if we get good quality embryos or not. Nowadays, what we do, I would say 90% of the cases, it's what we call the deferred treatment, where patients do 2 trips to Portugal. The first one, they can come for 2 days and stay just 1 night, or they can even do away and return the same day. And the second trip, they do a 3-day stay in Portugal. In the first trip, they do it's about doing the sperm collection and the gynecological evaluation, if that has not been already done in the country of origin. We, in between the 2 trips, we do the donor selection, the donor stimulation, egg retrieval, fertilization, embryo culture, and we freeze the embryos that are obtained. And on the second trip, we start the cycle of the patient in the country of origin, and they come directly for the embryo transfer. We obviously work together with the doctor in the country of origin in order to make sure that everything goes well. The advantages of this is that we can optimize the preparation of the endometrium. The endometrium is the tissue inside the uterus. We can optimize the donors of iron stimulation. No one has to wait for the other. And especially, we don't have the patients traveling to Portugal without us knowing how many embryos do we have here waiting for them. I always say, I sleep better when I know how many embryos do I have for a patient than when the patient comes, and obviously it's uncertainty. We need to work with what nature brings us. The disadvantage here is that this is 2 trips instead of 1. It might take a little longer because these are 2 cycles, a cycle of the donor and then the cycle of the patient. And obviously, it's also extremely important to talk about the technologies that are used, because in Portugal, at least, and again, I'm talking about our policy, we use everything that we have in all cases. What does it mean? It means that we don't charge for add-ons. So it's not pay this for the treatment, plus this for the embryoscope, plus this for the embryo glue, plus this from the assisted hatching, plus this for extended culture. No, we don't work like that. We have a fixed price and everything is included. And we will use, to the best of our knowledge and the best of our technologies. So if those technologies are not proven or whatever, then it's our problem that we are wasting money in something that won't help the patients. This is why we are so careful while deciding what type of technology is using and so on, because we only use technologies and and systems that we really believe in. And so in this case, I will just go through a few ones. For example, at Ferticentro, we are still the only clinic in Portugal for 7 years now using the RI Witness system. What is that? It's a traceability system. Each patient is registered, then they receive a unique ID code and an ID card, and then we have identification chips with this code in all containers with the patient samples. When there is a sperm collection, when we collect the eggs, when we process the sperm, we process the eggs, everything, and those tags are detected by a wireless system. It's the RFID technology. It's the same that you will find in a bookshop. And then the system continuously monitors the working area, and we can tell where were our samples in every moment of the way. So it's very secure for the patients. They will not have any risk of mix-up and so on. And so, and it's obviously we also have human systems controlling and verifications and so on, but this is a non-human system. So besides all of the human embryologists controlling for the systems and all of the quality measures, processing the patient at the time with 2 embryologists at all steps and so on, this is something that we always do. We also have this non-human system that is supervising everything and flagging wherever a situation doesn't match up with the normal workflow criteria. So every movement of the oocytes, the sperm, and the embryos is continuously monitored and recorded, and this gives us peace of mind, and it gives peace of mind to our patients. It's a very important piece of technology that not everyone talks about. Another thing that's also important is the time-lapse technology. We use the EmbryoScope. We're also the first in Portugal to have this technology. This is an example of a real case. Here we have 12 embryos, and at the end of the treatment, the patient gets this video. Okay, so you can not only the emotional part of showing your son his very first images from the moment he was just one cell into the moment he became a blastocyst, but also this allows us to identify the best embryos, to do the embryo culture in optimized conditions, to apply artificial intelligence algorithms to these images in order to understand what are the best embryos. And so there are a lot of events in embryo development that can only be seen with this type of technology. This is a good example. We've already removed 5 very good-looking embryos, and here the other ones, maybe these 2 should need a better look, but in principle the other ones were not used. So this is an example of the importance of having this type of technology, and also the transparency here is you get the images, and you get at the end of the treatment, you get a pen drive, and you can show the images of your embryos to anywhere in the world. So we're very proud of the embryos that we transfer, that we use, and we are very happy that you take those images and show to the doctors in other locations, so there's nothing to hide. What you see is what you get. And then the artificial intelligence technologies. Obviously, these are still experimentals. There are 2 types of there are several types of artificial technologies in the market. At Ferticentro, we're now using the AIVF1, still experimental. We're not completely relying on it, but the results have been extremely promising. We've taken some studies to scientific congresses. We're preparing a few ones to be shown in international and national congresses. But the take-home message here is this: this is not in the future. I believe in 5 years from now, all embryologists will be relying essentially on artificial intelligence. And then, but it's important to know what we're talking about. Okay, so it's really, when we use this, we need to say you had a 9 in the IVF score, we were using IDA score, we were using Chloe, wherever. There are many systems, but it's important that patients know why have we made some decisions. Okay, for now, this is experimental. We're still developing it and optimizing it, but there will be a moment where this will be part of our routine. And in my opinion, we're not that far away from that moment. Again, at no extra cost for the patients. And also, it's extremely, when we talk about transparency, one of the most critical subjects, hot topics, are pregnancy rates. So, but it's also important for patients to understand that numbers are actually easy to play. So what I always like to show patients is this. This is a graph that contains all cycles done in the United States in a year. It's published by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and you can see in the blue dots the results of egg donation treatments across ages. And you can see that this is essentially the same all around 60%. And it has been like this for many years. Okay, so there are in reality no differences. This is what the biology gives us. Okay, we can do wherever we want. We can select patients. We can apply methods and so on. But when we're doing an egg donation treatment, we are working with cells of a person who not only is not infertile, the egg donor, but she's young and she has been selected because she has a fertility above the average. Okay, so it's easy for us in the lab. What's difficult is to treat infertile people. When we're talking about egg donors, we're talking about people that are not infertile. And then on the green balls, we have the results of patients using their own eggs, obviously below, because egg donors are necessarily more fertile. And then it's like taking this point and taking it forward, because the uterus remains with more or less the same capacity to receive a pregnancy, and we can see the pregnancy rates going down. And it is also always like this. You can take the statistics from Australia, from Europe, from the United States, from Japan, wherever, and the graph always looks like this, and it looks like this for many years. Okay. However, when we go into the websites of some clinics, we can see people talking about there is a clinic here in Portugal that claims 98% of pregnancy rate, but this is in reality playing with the numbers. Remember, if you have a 60% pregnancy rate, that means that after one attempt, 60 patients get pregnant and 40 don't get pregnant. If you transfer an embryo to the remaining 40, 24 will get pregnant, 16 will not get pregnant. Transferring a third embryo to the remaining 16, 9 will get pregnant, 7 will not get pregnant. And so with just 3 attempts, we can climb an accumulated pregnancy rate of 93%, but it was always 60%. Okay, so it's we can play with the numbers as much as we want, but this is the reality. This is what we can rely on. This is what we can count on. And then it's patient mix-up, it's patient selection, it's selecting the data, everything. The reality is what it is. And also, it is very important when we're talking about transparency in IVF to understand what makes sense. And even the same patient can have, so there are things that today might make sense for a patient and not in the future, or the other way around. Initially, they were not needed, and maybe we can advise them in the future. Take, for example, the case of PGTA. Here we're talking about egg donation, but it's actually an interesting case. So you can see here that the risk of having an embryo that is not viable, an aneuploid embryo, at the age of the egg donors is 36%. This is what human biology gives us. By the age, women aged 38, 40 have a 64% chance that each embryo will be chromosomally abnormal. Okay, and then on higher ages, the percentage is higher. Okay, and so this is why normally we only advise PGTA from here upwards. Why is that? Because below the chances of, and we are here at 61%, okay? This is exactly the same chances that we get in an egg donation case, okay? So, so the chances of a pregnancy versus the chance of having an abnormal embryo. And when we are here, we have 36.9. This match exactly the chances of the egg donation. Here it is the opposite of the egg donation, sorry. So, but what I'm saying is this. So this is why when we're working with egg donors, it really doesn't make sense to do PGTA. Why is that? Because with an egg donor, you get 60% pregnancies, like we've seen in the United States graphic, and 40% non-pregnancies. With an egg donor, it's a little bit the same. So doing PGTA will not change it. Obviously, we can take a look at these graphs. This is a graph from iGenomics, one of the biggest genetics labs in the world. And we can see that implantation rates by age in egg donation cases, these are the gray bars, they stay the same for all age groups, while with patients on eggs, they go down. This means what? This means that when you transfer viable embryos, chances are always kind of the same. And so these results are almost look like the pregnancy rates from egg donation cases that we had in the American registry. This is also a proof that, so if you transfer tested embryos, you get this. If you transfer egg donation cases, you get the same. This is why we don't advise PGTA for egg donation. Okay? This is so another reason why it is important to be transparent. Obviously, it is easy to manipulate the information and so on. But when you see that things don't actually change, it's not ethical to promote PGTA if if looking it on a broader way, it won't change the reality of our patients. Obviously, I'm personally in favor of discussing this with the patient and patients making informed decisions on whether they should do it or not. Unfortunately, the law doesn't agree with me, and we can only do PGTA when there is a clear indication for that. It's a different story, okay? But I can totally understand the basis of the law, because in reality, doing PGTA or doing just egg donation yields exactly the same results. And so the PGTA, in these cases, we can say that it is useless if we look at the big picture. And these were just some notes, but wherever we are, we'll always need transparency, whether we are in an open ID country or in an anonymous country. It's always needed transparency while we are making some of the more important decisions of our life. So this is why we always root for the open ID side of things. And thank you for having listened to me, and I'm very happy to answer all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed. As always, thorough explanation, thorough presentation for sure. So thank you so much for sharing this. And of course, now we will go for your questions. I do see some questions ready. However, if you have some more, you know what to do. Type those in. All is anonymous, and Vladimira is simply here to help you out with them. And the first question is here from Annie. And so, have you had any cases in which the egg donation did not work at all, after trying many times, and how often does that happen?
Have you had any cases in which the egg donation did not work at all after trying many times? Of course, this happens. So when we're talking about 60%, we're talking about 40% of cases where it doesn't work. Okay, so it's it's completely, it's normal, okay? It's actually, and obviously we can isolate groups of patients where they have a thin endometrium, where there is a male factor, where there are other endometrial factors, where there are immunitary issues. So there could be a lot of reasons why an egg donation treatment doesn't work. Actually, the last part of my presentation, where I was showing the results from the American registry, show exactly that. It's a 60% probability. So unfortunately, in 40% of the cases, it doesn't work.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. I do believe it was helpful for you. And regarding to your presentation, right, this new profile looks good. And when exactly did you start with these new profiles?
So we are using, it's a complicated question because we have started using detailed profiles in 2020. Obviously, the initial ones, they looked uglier, but their content was more or less what's inside the new ones. What are the new features of the ones that we have started to use in the beginning of 2024? The last ones that I showed. Those are the features that include the emotional intelligence test and the personality test. These are new things that we are trying. The difficulty here is that it takes some time to of the donors to do that, and but we are having good results. We are, I don't know exactly how many of these have we already done, but we have done a good number of cases, and we are in a transition phase. Donors that have been approved initially, they are being converted to the new model of profile, but the information inside it's the old one. New donors are all being screened under this new profile.
Okay. Thank you so much for explaining. And the next question, a bit longer question here. So what is the situation in case of embryo donation? We'll have an IVF treatment with embryo donation, but we were told by our clinic that they have much more less embryo donors than egg donors. In this way, we do not really have any chance to choose the embryo even to look at a little bit similar to us. Thank you so much for your question.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the case because the embryo donation, at least in Portugal, embryos that are donated are created, are donated by other people. When you are doing your own treatment, you use some embryos and you leave some others. Or maybe if you divorce in the middle or for whatever reason, you can decide to donate your embryos to other patients. And so these embryos already exist and they are there. What we can do is just tell the story of the embryo. We can say that this embryo is from a patient that was 34, her husband was 35, wherever, they were Caucasian. Whatever happens, we can tell the story, but we cannot say, well, if you need an embryo like this and like that, maybe we're lucky, okay? And also, typically, we have less information on donated embryos because when we're talking with donors, these donors are screened. We can test the donors for 2,200 diseases, okay? So we screen the donors a lot. We ask them all sorts of questions. The psychologist consultation is designed for donors to be completely aware of the fact that they will be found and the impact, all of that. So it is done in a systematized way. Well, embryos that are donated, obviously, we also talk with a psychologist. It's a big part of our work, but it is sometimes it's just a couple that says, well, I already have 2 kids, I don't need the other embryos, let someone else use them. So they are very aware of the system, they know the process, they are taking conscious. In Portugal, we need to wait 3 years before the embryos can donate, so they have time to think about that. These are not rush decisions, but obviously it's not the same. We don't know their favorite food, we don't know all of their things. Okay,
Chris, Thank you so much for your next question here, an explanation. And now we might have our final question. So if you have more questions, you know what to do. This will be the final call for those questions. And the question is, so can you talk a bit about the quality scores A, B, and C and D, and how much do they differ in chance of a live birth?
Well, in fact, this classification is being abandoned nowadays. So, making it more clear, there are studies. For example, there is a very interesting study made in Italy with researchers where they tested blastocysts that were classified as A, B, C, and D, and then they tested them genetically. And they reached the conclusion that there were no significant differences between the risk of an embryo being viable or not. So what the conclusion from this is that so this classification, these are morphological classifications. So it's the embryologists who decide whether these whether these embryos are viable or not based in what we see in static images. Nowadays, we have the embryoscope, we have the morphokinetic classification, and we have the artificial intelligence that is helping us more and more assessing our embryos. So normally, obviously we look at the old classification because this is something that we can grab, but at the end of the day, we need to look at everything else, also the morphokinetics of the embryo, and I believe that in maybe months, maybe years, there will be automated systems that will tell us, based on things that the human eye can't even see, whether an embryo is viable or not.
Okay. Thank you so much indeed. And of course, if you have any questions, as always, you can still type this. But of course, again, I would like to add that you can get in touch directly with Vladimiro and the team at FertiCentro. I'm sure they will be happy to answer any of your questions, queries. And of course, I'm sure we will be back with Vladimiro, and there are more topics to discuss, I'm sure. So thanks everyone for joining us today. And before we finish, as always, I would like to ask if there's anything you wish to add. So don't hesitate if there's anything to add here, and we can finish for today.
Just one, because there was a follow-up question here saying that I didn't answer the question about embryos A, B, C, and D.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
I mean, it will depend, okay? So if an embryo is a blastocyst, if this blastocyst has developed within the real time frames and so on, I would say that there is no difference, okay? In terms of the probability of being euploid, according to the studies that are published, there shouldn't be any difference. Normally, when we grade the embryos, as A, B, and C or D, we have to have in consideration also obviously local criteria from different clinics, but especially we have to think that these are photos of the embryos. When we're talking about morphokinetics of the embryos, we are discussing how an embryo is at that particular moment where it was observed. An embryo can evolve and he can expand. There are a lot of different factors in embryo development that can trick the embryologist. This is why the classification of embryos in morphokinetics is useful. Obviously, we share it. It's a question of, once again, transparency. We like other clinics to know how we classify the embryos, but it is not the whole story. So it's a little part of the story. It's obviously A is better than B and better than C is better than D. This is obvious, but those are not the only factors. So we have, because in terms of the probability of the embryos being genetically viable, there are no differences. A, B, and C, and D, it's more about the stage of development of each embryo in every given moment. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. I believe that was useful now and it's clear for you. And of course, we will be finishing today, but of course, as I mentioned, we will be back. And also, I would like to add that next week we will be actually here on Tuesday. There will be more. There is another event, and I can only encourage you to join us. There will be 3 different doctors once again, and we will talk about implantation window. The link is in the chat, so if this is something that you wonder about and have some questions, join us on Tuesday. We will be live and we'll be happy to help you out with some of those as well. And again, thank you so much, Vladimira Silva, fertility specialist, but also scientific director, executive director at FertiCentro. Thank you so much, Vladimira. It was lovely to have you as always. Everyone, thank you for joining. I do believe it was helpful for you, and we are definitely looking forward to some more events with you. So thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you,
Have a
Caroline.
good night.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here, and good luck for all of those who are trying to have a baby. All the best.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.